Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Boer Refugee program is yet again in the news. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So what's actually going on? Well, you will recall that Donald Trump opened up a refugee program to minorities in South Africa, specifically Boers. I'm going to call it Boers because the last time I did this video, it got fact-checked by YouTube. Now, Donald Trump opened up the refugee program to some individuals. You will recall that some individuals had already gone over to the United States. But in their latest news, apparently the US administration has booked dozens of flights for refugees who have qualified underneath the existing program, but they didn't actually go. Now, according to the news, only 3 of the applicants arrived. Now, this is being classed as a public embarrassment, with suggestions from the news that the entire thing is just nothing more than political theater that's blowing up in the Americans' faces. Now, this idea that the Afrikaners are not applying for refugee status in the United States, well, has been promoted by News 24, specifically through what they classed prominent Afrikaners, academics, and journalists who have called the refugee program offensive, racist, and dishonest. They've stressed that while South Africa has high crime and social tension, there is no racial extermination campaign against most Boers. Now, in a letter penned and entitled "Not in Our Name," News 24 pushed an article entitled "A Response to the Misuse of Their Story in US Politics," their story being Boers. Now, according to the article, a coalition of Afrikaans-speaking South Africans condemned the hijacking of their history for the American culture wars. They warned that American conservatives were cherry-picking South Africa's past to feed the far right. It's always the far right. And specifically referencing the great takeover theory. I can't say what it's actually called because, again, YouTube will strike the video, which paints Boers as victims of racial displacement. And you're seeing the lengths I'm having to go to avoid certain phrases because, again, YouTube will go nuts. Now, the signatories to this letter wrote that the framing was not only misleading but dangerous, as it weaponized South Africa's history and reduced complex social realities to symbols of Boer decline. The message was clear: South Africans, both black and Boer, are engaged in nation building, not race-based victim politics. Although if you actually live in South Africa, you might feel slightly different. Now, the ANC issued a formal statement on the 26th of October 2025 welcoming the declaration by freedom-loving Afrikaans-speaking South Africans. Now, the ANC commended the authors of "Not in Our Name" for rejecting the distortion of South Africa's story to serve extremist movements abroad. Yes, now the Republican Party is an extremist movement. Now, the statement praised these citizens for recognizing that South Africa's unity depends on building a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous society. And if you've heard those slogans before, well, that's because that's the ANC's party line. So that's pretty much ANC Politics 101. In any case, they suggested that this was an honest letter which showed our painful past while affirming a shared nation future. Now, the ANC specifically said, "We reject the narrative that casts Afrikaners as victims of racial persecution in post-apartheid South Africa. This framing now being used to support the far-right great takeover theory in the United States is not only misleading, but also dangerous." The ruling party said that this principled stand acknowledges the structural suffering endured by black South Africans under colonialism and apartheid, and the ongoing transformation is a constitutional obligation, not charity. Constitutional obligation, obviously drawing reference to the redress clause of the Constitution, yet again. ANC Politics 101. Now, the ANC called on all citizens, including formerly privileged groups, to join hands in completing the unfinished business of liberation, ensuring full transformation, equality, and social justice, which means, I don't know, we just loot the state more? Who knows? Now, the entire episode has led many individuals to ask the question of whether or not News 24 is being funded by the ANC. Rob Hersov has previously suggested that the ANC were, and I quote, bootlickers. Rob, if you are watching this, man, I really hate that phrase. Can you not find a better one? In any case, this has led some individuals to notice, and I will say I am one of them. I keep banging on this drum, but there's a reason for it, because as I keep saying, it does show you where South Africa's politics are. And that is, if you've noticed that in the last 4 articles, the last 4 opinion pieces on News 24, well, they've all been very pro-Palestinian, and specifically has given positive coverage of Francesca Albanese, the special UN reporter for Palestine. Now, if you look at the number of neutral or pro-Israel type articles that have been released, nada, not one. And this is again showing you that ANC Politics 101 is on full display within News 24. If we shift our news focus abroad, there is an article that appeared in the Telegraph in the UK by Jack Simmons, who slammed the propaganda ecosystem surrounding Gaza. And he specifically argued that the claims of famine and genocide have been weaponized through disinformation by Hamas and sympathetic media networks. Now, Simmons says that the reality in Gaza has been eclipsed by fantasy, and calls for accountability from journalists and international institutions that knowingly spread falsehoods. The piece underscores how narratives, not facts, now dominate Middle Eastern reporting. And we can see this on full display with News 24 in South Africa. And yet again, we can see that shift when it comes through to things such as the Boer Refugee program. Now, more interestingly, if you actually take the news and look at it slightly objectively, you'll notice the news that Nelson Mandela's granddaughters visited Israel and Gaza in October 2025 on a humanitarian mission. Now, they rejected the South African government's claim that Israel is an apartheid state, saying apartheid was racial segregation. Israel is not like that. They met survivors of October 7th attacks, hostage families, and aid workers coordinating relief inside Gaza. So they've actually been on the ground and seen it for themselves. Something that I assure you no South African news outlet has done, despite being invited by the Zionist Federation on more than one occasion. The South African news delegations have refused to go on the basis that it will interfere with government policy. Can you see what's happening here? It shows you that DIRCO is specifically stopping journalists from reporting objectively and instead relying purely on nothing more than government narrative. Now, the trip with the Mandela granddaughters was framed as humanitarian and not political. They believe that their grandfather would have opposed terror and promoted dialogue, something that the ANC itself has not done. The ANC has been very clear that they will not talk to Israel. They will only talk with Hamas. Now, this directly contradicts Pretoria's position at the ICJ, where it leads the genocide case against Israel. But we are seeing that as more of the facts are coming out following the ceasefire, the narrative of genocide itself is falling apart. Over 2 million people and less than 70,000 deaths. I think the current death toll is at around 67,000 people. Doesn't sound like much of a genocide to me. It sounds like, well, a war. And that's exactly what you'd expect in, well, a war zone. 2 years of war, and that's all you managed to kill. The Israeli army must be the shoddiest army on the planet trying to commit genocide, and that's all they managed to do. This does raise the relevant question of whether or not the genocide narrative has been fabricated, as many individuals are now suggesting. But this does again highlight a prominent issue in that the South African news now appears to be more interested in following ANC dogma rather than actually reporting objectively. News 24 has specifically said in numerous opinion pieces that this is not the case. They suggest that they are completely independent. But when we start to notice these little things, such as the refugee narrative and the Gaza narrative, one has to raise relevant questions. And you can let me know what you think of that in the comment section below. On to a couple small stories before we get to the end of the video. The first one really is around the DA's BE gamble. As you'll know if you've been watching my videos over the last couple of days, the Democratic Alliance is taking a major electoral risk by suggesting that it wants to scrap broad-based black economic empowerment in its economic policy platform. Now, the DA is betting that voters are disillusioned with race-based economic policy, but nevertheless faces backlash for appearing to be indifferent to historical inequalities. Now, many business leaders are watching very closely because the move could either redefine opposition politics or cement ANC dominance. Now, one battle that the ANC hasn't won is actually around universities, because the government has now opened the door for private sector-backed universities, with major JSE-listed companies expressing interest in owning universities. This marks a noticeable shift in South Africa's higher education, because at the moment, the public sector has a monopoly on education, with some limited hybrids between private and public partnerships. Now, the entire idea behind this is that somehow they will get graduate unemployment reduced if they improve the quality of the degree issued by the university itself. Let me know what you think of that in the comment section below. On to a very final news story, and this is the warning around police corruption. Because a former MP has warned that there appears to be abuse of power by the ANC and inappropriate relationships which have become endemic in SAPS. Now, this MP has reported that there is favoritism inside SAPS, and there is a compromised command structure and a collapse in professional integrity in the organization itself. And this is leaving policing politicized and paralyzed. Now, this comes amidst a new crime wave and growing calls for national reform within the police service. Now, why all of this is relevant is because if you look at the state generally tends to suggest that you and I as citizens should allow them to have the monopoly on violence. They own all the firearms and they'll protect us. But what we're seeing is that SAPS itself has been weaponized and turned into a mafia state. All this at a time when SAPS is suggesting that they should disarm you and me in brand new firearm legislation and allow them to provide all the policing needs for the country. And to that, I would say completely footsack. But in any case, I'll leave you with this clip from an actual firearm expert who gives a current update on what the current legislation is and the attempts by SAPS to amend firearms legislation. In any case, you can watch that right here.
Proposed amendments to the Firearms Control Act of 2000 are back in the news. The 2021 draft amendments that were soundly rejected by the public to a rate of about 96% have been recycled and unfortunately were not sent through the paper shredder where they belong, and then in the bin and then in the incinerator, and are presently languishing at NEDLAC, who, as far as I'm aware, are busy trying to constitute a committee of some sort to discuss the proposed amendments. We are in a country where whistleblowers, senior investigators from the Hawks and the private sector, lawyers, liquidators, everyone that comes a little bit too close to exposing the extensive network of government corruption and criminal infiltration of the state. Anyone that comes too close to that is now a target, and people are just being assassinated in broad daylight and in their offices. In a country where this is happening, the state is continuing with an agenda of civilian disarmament, where the state itself is so infiltrated by criminals, the security forces are so infiltrated by criminals, where SAPS corruption is responsible for arming Cape gangsters, where we have guns coming across the border from Namibia, from corrupt policemen in Namibia sending AK-47s and Uzis to Cape Flats gangsters. All of this happening in defiance of the government's own commissioned research, which strongly warns against the consequences of further gun control legislation tightening up. Why are we trying to leave the public vulnerable? Why are we targeting semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that are already the most restricted firearm class out there, of which very few are in circulation, civilian hands, which are not even used by the majority of criminals, and where they're used by criminals were either procured illegally or sourced from the state? What is the point of this? It is barking up the wrong tree. There's been no meaningful stakeholder engagement with any firearm rights bodies or gun owners themselves. It is a malicious, ignorant, irrational process that will only succeed in leaving the public defenseless in a country that, by the ministers of police's own admission, is bordering on becoming a cartel-ridden mafia state.
In any case, ladies and gentlemen, that's the news of today. Do let me know what your comments to everything is in the comment section below. And until next time, bye.